next? Okay, so I was just trying to figure out how much time before we start. A few more minutes. Okay.
Are we on? Yes. Okay. So Wikipedia is sponsoring a Wiki Research and Open Data Hackathon on November 9th. So I think see either Twitter or Wikimedia for more details.
Can I do 2 of those?
Yeah.
November 8th here, there'll be, it's Aaron Schwartz's birthday. There's going to be a hackathon and presentations on things that have moved forward in the public access to the public domain. So that's free here. And on the 15th of November, there's going to be a launch of the defensive patent license. The idea of doing sort of to patents what the GPL did in open source in terms of having free access for those that are declaring themselves defensive with patents.
Great. Okay, and I will talk a little bit about the hackathon later in the day. I don't want to take up any more time now. Let's launch immediately into, oh, sorry, one more public service announcement. Somebody dropped a hotel key card. If you recognize that you've dropped a hotel key card, come and see me. Not that you can't get back into your hotel, but anyway. Okay, so Kathi Fletcher, thank you.
Hi. In the back, can you hear me? Raise your hand. All right, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to talk about textbooks in the browser. And if you want to follow along or refer to any of the links that I give toward the end, my talk is up on SlideShare at that bit.ly link, Fletcher-bib13. So a little bit about who I am. I started out at an organization called Connexions that is an open repository for textbooks. Anybody can upload textbooks, parts of textbooks, and remix and adapt those textbooks. And there's a guy here, Phil Schatz, and would you raise your hand? Who is still with Connexions and also works with me on this project and will be here at the Hack Day. So I'll tell you a little more about him at the end of the talk. I did that for 4 years, and in that process, one of the things that I learned about were the difficulties that authors have in creating content that is easy to remix and adapt. And I got a fellowship with the Shuttleworth Foundation to build tools for remixing open education resources. And I have a project called OER Pub. So I wanted to give just a little bit about the vision and why this could be really, really interesting. So if you think about learning and you think about the digital age, all of your classes, your past knowledge, the things that you're actively working on now and want to remember, all of that stuff could be connected, and it could be available to you everywhere. It could be available in print, it could be available on your laptop, it could be available on your phone and your tablet. And that would be really, really interesting, and it would change the way we learn. So if you can imagine, if you have a course load, let's say you are an active student right now and you have a course load and you're taking history and statistics and physics, and you also have your background knowledge from high school, your chemistry and physics from high school, say, all of those things that are available. If we could imagine that we could take all that content and we could have a magic transmogrifier, borrowing a term from Calvin and Hobbes, for any of you who know that. It would be really interesting if we could take that content and have it available ubiquitously, everywhere, online, in print, and in different forms, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So, you know, that's something that the affordance of the digital age really gives us the ability to do. So, and we want to have access to that content potentially in different forms. So if I could take all my classes and have auto-generated a set of flashcards that I use when I have some spare time, that would be pretty interesting, and it would change the way I learn and the way I remember things. Also, if I could take all of that material and have practice problems that are tailored just for where I am in my learning and what I'm just about to forget, that would be pretty nifty. So how would we do that? Well, you know, something like I could take all that content and I could find the definitions that are in that content and the glossary terms, and I could make flashcards out of that. It would be even more interesting if I could take my own notes that I'm taking on this and have that auto-generate flashcards for me, practice problems on the material that's around the areas that I took notes or that has similarities to the areas I took notes on. So some of the really cool stuff that Hypothesis and Annotator are working on, it would be nifty to tie that all in. And you know, I could take practice problems that are already freely available in those materials. So what do we need to achieve that vision? So we can't really do that with a paper textbook, not in that format at least. We need to be able to recognize those structures within all of that content. We need to be able to find definitions. We need to be able to find exercises. We need to be able to find the notes that people have taken. And we need those books, that content, to be publicly available somewhere, for there to be a way for us to get access to it and get content out of it and get it onto all of our devices. One of the barriers to that, and this comes from my background at Connexions, is that Connexions had this really, really nifty idea that you would create content in this modular way, and you would create it using structure, and in particular XML. For those of you who are techie, XML is like the language of the web, HTML, and has a lot of angle brackets. One of the learnings from Connexions is that it is very hard for authors to work with. It was a huge barrier to really achieving this definition. It was not having good enough tools for authors to use to create content that has this nice structure that would allow us to do these interesting things with it. And then, because this is a pretty big challenge to create good tools that make it easy for authors, one of the other pieces is that it'd really be nice if the tools that we create are really easy to extend, so that we can, as people want to include more interesting content in textbooks, want to include visualizations, simulations, videos, etc. We want to make sure that it's easy to create, easy to use tools for including that content also. So my claim in this talk is that we actually are there. We can achieve this vision. We have all of the pieces in place right now to do this. We have a common format that we can use. HTML5 raises the bar for structure in web content. And O'Reilly Media, for instance, has created a version of their XML language called HTML Book that's in HTML. That is very easy to adapt for textbooks and have textbook HTML. So we can get that structure. EPUB 3 is defining really a language for the mobile web. And with projects like EPUB.js and Redium, where you can view that EPUB in the web anywhere you are, on your phone, whatever, this becomes a common format that we can really leverage for learning. And browser-based technology has made it possible for us to not only read in the web, but write in the web, and annotate in the web, and view, and really have living documents in the web. Lives on the web in easy to discover places. That is also going to facilitate this vision. And there are a couple of places that do that. Connexions already does that. It hosts open textbooks, and they have a publisher of their own called OpenStax. And then, for those of you who are developers, there is a service called GitHub built on Git, which is versioning software that has made building software, a social process. People host their projects, their software projects, on GitHub, and it's very easy to find stuff, and it's easy to make your own copy of it and start adapting and creating from that. And I have to admit that I was pretty slow to think that we needed GitHub for books. I was really worried about that methodology. But when Phil, who's here, actually created a prototype of using GitHub as the backend for books, really this social storage place for books. Okay, so I'm going to give you links so you can play with this editor at the end, but I'm just going to do screenshots because I'm a huge chicken and there's no way I'm demoing live. Anyway, this is GitHub Book Editor. Also, after you play with it, if you want to send me name ideas, because I'm very, very bad at naming things, don't meet my children. Anyway, no, their names are very nice, but anyway, GitHub Book Editor. This is an editor that runs in the browser. The books are hosted on GitHub. It's using GitHub's API to keep your book up to date as you edit on the web. And we spent close to a year really working on usability for authors, and I want to talk just a little bit about principles that went into the design of this editor. So one of the things is that authors are used to Word and Google Docs and things that are very much like writing on a canvas. I have this canvas, I'm writing on a canvas, and so we really wanted to respect that model. And as much as possible, the editor just allows you to freeform, flow, paragraphs, images, etc. And where we need to have specialized functionality, we build that in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. This is, my Shuttleworth Foundation Fellowship is about remixing, and one of the things with remixing is that attribution is really important. And so when you drop an image into the editor, it asks for source information from you. And there are lots of people working on, can we automate some of this? And so as those sorts of things become, with a resource, it tells you, okay, this was the original author, this is the license it's used under. We can fill in a lot of that for the author. Something that DHWriter talked about is that if we've got this ability to have this born digital content, let's also make it born accessible. And let's figure out ways to really encourage authors to create accessible content. So I'm making no claims that this editor is fully accessible at this point, but this is something that we've really done user interface research on and striven to create as much as possible. So one of the kind of small things is that images that are in your textbook as you're creating it, if they don't have descriptions that would be helpful for people with visual impairments, you get a slight stick, a little nag that the image is missing a description. And if you click that, then you get a little carrot, you get a thank you. And so if you guys play with the editor, please try that out. Mathematics, big thing in textbooks. Mathematics is really key, it's important. We did not want to build a math editor because that would be a bigger project than the editor we're building. So instead, we work with this group named Siavula, which works with teachers in South Africa and also creates textbooks. And they have done lots of content building sprints with teachers. And what they had discovered is that if a teacher writes mathematics, they're comfortable writing code. In fact, it's faster. It's faster to write x caret 2 than to use a big palette of mathematical functions and try to drag them into place. So it can be, anyway, we were just lazy, but what we did was build a very simple mathematics editor that allows you to use either ASCII math or LaTeX math. And then it gives you a live preview. And that's the key here for teachers, that live preview. The other thing that we have in one of the versions of the editor that we've got out there is a cheat sheet, so that you can learn that code as you go along. You can cut and paste from this cheat sheet, find the pattern, cut and paste that in. We also did a sprint with teachers, and teachers also cut and paste their math back and forth to learn, how do I get all the equal signs to line up niftily? Okay, so anyway. And then you get this added bonus that it's now more accessible because the math is stored inside the web page in an accessible way with MathML that DHWriter talked about. And then here's the place where we care about structure. And do we have something that we did a lot of research on? There are parts of the document that we want to make sure and protect. We want to have these definitions and exercises and things like that findable within the textbook. And so there are, in the editor, drag and drop widgets, similar to iBooks Author, and you drag those in. Then you edit as if it's in the canvas. You just add your definition or your exercise or your quotation or your numbered equation, whatever. But you actually get some benefits from doing that. You can drag and drop that to a different spot in the document if you want. There's a special copy feature. You can copy the whole thing. If, say, it's an activity and you want to copy it from one textbook to another, you have a special copy feature. You can delete the whole thing at once. This is to make sure that the document structure doesn't get messed up as you're editing and changing things. We have a little bit of collaboration support, and that's something that if you're interested in, we have more ideas about how to make this editor even more collaborative. Right now, authors should work on separate chapters, but you can see what your fellow authors are doing. If they edit another chapter in the book, it'll update in your copy of it as you're editing. The table of contents updates automatically too, and that's all talking back with GitHub to store the book. Okay, a couple of things that just at your leisure you can look at. It is an open source project, so very eager to get other people to work with this, use it, embed it in other places, adapt it. It's based on an editor called Aloha Editor, which is an HTML5 editor. And some nifty things, other nifty things, aside from it, you're just editing right in your browser. There's also a view of your textbook online, hosted by GitHub, that happens fairly automatically. And this is a service to create PDFs. So PDF generation is a little bit bigger project than you're not going to create PDFs in your browser. But this service is watching as the book is changed and rebuilding the PDF so that it's available for download. So, and again, that's all open source code that can be adapted and improved upon. And there's the result, the PDF downloaded with nice mathematics. And then the adaptability of this editor. We have another version of the editor on remix.oerpub.org that is really geared toward taking documents that start out in Word, start out in Google Docs, start out on somebody's blog, LaTeX, a few other formats, and convert it so that it's in this nice HTML5 textbook HTML format. And this is the same editor, so you land on the editor, but embedded a little bit differently than you saw in the GitHub version of it. Connexions is also using this editor, and this is kind of an old screenshot, I apologize, but this is the same underlying technology used for Connexions' new editing system. And this is another embedding of the editor, a group, Digital Humanities. This is a version of the editor that's used to submit papers to Digital Humanities Conference. These guys submitted some code back to us, correcting some bugs, and upon investigation, they're reusing the editor in this environment, and they're interested in adding more reference functionality so that your bibliography is really nifty. Okay, so some links for you to try it out, and you have to have fairly decent internet, so you might be able to do it here right now, or you may need to do this a little bit later. You can do it one of two ways. Either you can go to editor.oerpub.org, or you can go to the slightly longer URL, but making it super clear that this is just hosted on GitHub. There's no server, no nothing. You're just using it right from GitHub. If you're a developer, I've put some links to all of the code, the GitHub book editor, the Aloha, our fork of the Aloha editor that's got those semantic features in it. And this is a slightly obscured URL, and the French guy who had that nifty art where your book was blackened out. This is a little exercise in art here, so you can figure that URL out. Anyway, that's the PDF continuous integration PDF generation code. Okay, and finally, any of you who are, so if you're an author, please check this out. Try the code out. It is. I just want to say it is alpha code. There are bugs in it. But I really, really want feedback on, is the model working? Does it make sense? 2 minutes? Okay. And if you're a developer and you're staying tomorrow, please come to the Hack Day. We're going to do a couple of things. We really want to get EPUB.js and Hypothesis integrated into this so that you really have the read-write web. And also, we have a very simple script, Vagrant script, to create a development environment for you. If you want to experiment with adding plugins to the editor, your own ideas for extending it, please come join us. Phil Schatz will be we will be there tomorrow, so I've got his picture there so you can find him. Anyway, that's it.
We're going to talk a lot. Oh, it's yours?
No.
Oh, that one.
You want to adjust this?
That's not me.
And I should briefly say, if, although again, I'll talk a little bit about the Hackday in a little bit, but if you haven't already registered for the Hackday, we have a very closed physical space, and so unless you bring me a case of very good bourbon, please follow it from afar. I'm afraid we just do not have space for additional participants on the Hackday, which will be at Swiss next.
It's okay. I like to have this stuff. Let's turn
Okay.
pages. It's all-
So you about ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Wait, you're taller.
I just start?
Yeah, you just start. You tell people, who are you? Who are you?
Oh, I thought you introduced me. That's okay.
No,
I'll
no,
just-
I don't do that custom service. Bob.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I'm Bob Glushko. I'm a professor at the Information School at University of California across the bridge. I've actually spent most of my career in industry and starting at Bell Labs about 30 years ago, inventing online publishing and document management. Spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley helping companies become online publishers. And I retired from all that, and then I discovered about a year ago that none of the problems have been solved yet. So we have to solve them again on collaborative authoring and maintenance of a multidisciplinary textbook. This one. Okay. So my talk today, I'm going to talk about the challenges that emerged in this project to build a multidisciplinary textbook, and in particular, the way it caused us to rethink book design, e-book design, authoring, and then the maintenance and evolution of the book over time. I'm struck by how many people are doing really nicely synergistic things. It's been a fabulous 2 days, and I hope I can contribute to that synergy. Let me start here. What do libraries, zoos, supermarkets, vineyards, Amazon, Google, Wikipedia, stamp collections, your office drawer, iTunes, and your garage have in common? Obviously nothing. But if you look at it from the right level of abstraction, it's the intersection of library science, computer science, informatics, MIS, law, business, and human resources management, which is the discipline of organizing. And so I call all of these things organizing systems, which are collections of resources that have been intentionally arranged to enable some set of interactions. And that definition is sufficiently general to cover all of them, I think. And so I wrote this textbook to be the textbook for this emerging notion of information schools, which are 40 or 50 schools around the world that come from those 17 different traditions that are trying to be something the same. So the book looks like this in print, but about a year before I finished the print book, I realized it wasn't going to be a very good print book because it's a multidisciplinary book that raises a bunch of design challenges for books. And so we decided to make it into an ebook at the same time. And in doing that, as I began to understand what multidisciplinary really meant, I saw that it was going to make it harder to do because it was changing fundamentally what books were going to be like. In particular, the text is multidisciplinary because it's trying to explain the concept at the intersection of many disciplines, but it has to do that in a way which is disciplinary neutral. But at the same time, it has to build on top of that neutrality at the core to explain the discipline-specific aspects of this new discipline in a way that connects to the transdisciplinary concept at the core. So it has to basically handle this thing at the middle, which is the new thing, and then yet explain it in ways that the people in the old fields can still understand. And that wasn't clear at first. I mean, I started off with a publisher, a traditional academic publisher, and we were going to write a traditional academic book. And like I said, about a year before we finished, I realized that it was going to have to be very different, because I was running into this fundamental challenge of multidisciplinarity, which is what I've come to call the breadth versus depth challenge, which is that how can a book be both broad enough to include all the disciplines that fit into this multidisciplinary thing, while treating all of them with enough respect and depth to be credible to people in those disciplines. You don't want to write a book which is a comic book that misses all the depth and nuance of the fields that presumably contribute to this new discipline. So how do you make a book broad and deep at the same time? And I did it wrong for the first year. For the first year, I said, I'll just put everything in the book. That makes everyone can have what they need in the book to make it multidisciplinary. And so as I would have the book, actually I should say something more fundamental, which is that I am actually the editor of this book with 18 co-authors. I'm also the first author of 8 of the 10 chapters, but that's part of the story here about how a book can actually evolve in this multidisciplinary way while still having a kind of intellectual core from somebody who was the primary author and editor. So that was the part of the issues that we're going to have to deal with in this authoring and a multidisciplinary collaborative work. So we're all working on this book. And by having a number of different schools using the drafts and coming from different perspectives, we were able to start purging some of the disciplinary bias that I started with as a person trained in computer science and cognitive science. But the more we did that, the more people would say, oh, here's some great comments for you to fix this chapter. And so I'm getting comments from computer scientists and cognitive scientists and library scientists and lawyers and business people and MIS people, and I want to put them all in the book to make the book work. But of course, that means the book's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it became so big that it was going to be unwieldy. So we finally said, something's wrong here, and I tried to think through the problem in a different way. And so what we did was we said, well, let's rethink the notion of a book, especially multidisciplinary books, see if we can solve this problem. And I think we solved it in a way which actually is a very old solution, but it adapts well to new technologies. I mean, the basic idea is that a textbook, and especially multidisciplinary ones, will have lots of different kinds of content. It might have core text, but it will also have lots of supplemental materials from different disciplines. It might have simulations, examples, data sets, case studies, all kinds of things. And you could treat some of that as the core of this discipline that you're trying to write about, and some of it is the supplemental parts. And again, this is not a new idea. We've always had supplemental content in books. Some of it has traditionally been kind of in line, like tables and figures and sidebars and things, and some of it has been pointed at, like footnotes and endnotes and glossaries and citations. Some of it has been kind of external and wrapped around it, that paratextual stuff, the appendices, the commentaries, the case studies, and so on. And it's not that none of this stuff can be core, but it's just that I think that it tends to enhance the core by adding that stuff in the lower parts of this table. And so the simplest way to handle this breadth versus depth challenge is to selectively include that stuff. So you say, let me personalize or customize your textbook, having a point of view by having the kind of core content in the middle, and then logically include some of these supplemental materials in the text stream. And that's what you do with a footnote or anything. And you basically, you follow it through some voluntary act of the reader, and maybe perhaps by following hypertext links to some other content. It's an optional act, and we've done this for 2,000 years or something like that. So in the print book, we have endnotes often in books, and you follow them by voluntarily deciding to get some supplemental content that you bring into the book. So you follow those links by hand and eye, and that's how you create a kind of a different take on the book you were reading. Well, what we did as I realized that as a way to handle this challenge for an ebook environment, I said, let me tag these supplemental content by discipline, target audience, kind of contextual categories, and then use those tags to guide the reader to make decisions about whether to read the note. And again, this is something which we've done in print books a long time, but in ebooks it gives a radically different experience, I think one which is fundamentally better. So what I did in my final editorial pass last summer, when I rewrote 100,000 words of various contributions from 17 co-authors, I said, let me factor out all the stuff which is kind of purely disciplinary around this core of transdisciplinary content. And so I converted about 1/4 of the book into paragraph-size endnotes, and I tagged them by discipline. So you can think of this as letting the disciplinarity be a choice of the reader on the core book rather than a distraction that overwhelms you with stuff you don't quite understand yet. And so you can almost think of it, and this is where I started thinking about hypothesis, that it was kind of preemptive annotation. I'm saying there's going to be disciplinary annotation on this book, but let me do them in advance so that they'll be there when a reader wants to know more from that particular point of view in a discipline. And so in the print book, all the endnotes have these little tags like computing or cognitive science or library information science. And that means that when you look at a note, you can say, oh, this is adding some supplementarity from that point of view. So maybe the same paragraph about the Google Books project will have a legal footnote, a library science footnote, and a computer science footnote in the same paragraph, but different takes on the same content. We did something stupid here, which was that I didn't realize that I could do this in the print book too. I could have and this is the print book, but I could have also tagged the footnotes in the line of text. But I fixed that in the ebooks. So in the ebooks, as you read the text, you see, like it says, 49 web. It might say 50 LIS, 51 computer science. And then you pop up the footnote, and it basically has that additional annotation from that point of view. And in fact, there are now 10 different categories of endnotes in this book, ranging from library science to museum to archives to philosophy, linguistics, computer science, web architecture, business, and law. Is that 10? Okay. All right. But this is the wrong way to do it because, I mean, I go back a long way in this field, and I know this guy named Ted Nelson from way back, and Ted Nelson talked about transclusion, and he was right. It's a much more seamless experience. If I could somehow not have to follow the link, but somehow just say, give me the book that has computer science stuff in it. And so I've been imagining a book reader, probably son of EPUB.js, maybe grandson of EPUB.js, that'll be the browser-based book reader which will transclude on demand, where you could say, come on, configure your book and say, I've got this book with all this additional material, let me fly it toward computer science, let me fly it toward the humanities, and have that content seamlessly be in the book because I configured it to get stuff of a certain tag type, okay? So I can imagine that you have some kind of indication that material is there, maybe with these little sidebar markers, where in this case, I think the red note means a legal footnote. So I go, and then it's in the text in this sort of seamless down the middle way without having to follow the link. I think it's a much better experience. But something even more fundamental emerges at this point, which is that who am I to say there should be 10 types of notes? I mean, transclusion is a completely extensible mechanism. Anybody using this book, any institution, any department from some point of view should be able to add its supplemental content and tag it according to its particular point of view. So there could be a bioinformatics tag or a digital humanities tag or a University of Texas tag. And you could then tag your content the way, what you've now built is a network textbook. Because then you say, I can bundle the book, the prepackaged book that has some set of content in it, but then I can say, let me discover on my book in a browser content from other repositories which has been basically made public. So I can say, turn to page chapter 6.2, and there's a note on law or digital humanities or bioinformatics that I then discover, and it can bring it into my book if I want to do that. So that's what I'm calling the network textbook, and that's probably the great-grandson of EPUB.js. But that'll happen in our lifetime with the students because they work fast. So let me switch to the different topic, which is that how does this way of thinking about books and affect the writing and maintenance processes? So I'm going to caricature, and I really am going to caricature, because two of them are going to be straw men, 3 authoring options for achieving multidisciplinarity. The first thing I'm going to call, well, I guess I'll skip that slide. I'm going to call it coincidence. Coincidence is a very common academic model. You say, I announce a workshop or a conference and say, come, let's talk about this topic, and then people write papers about it, and it ends up in a Springer volume or something like that. There's kind of not really any clear focus of what it's about, but they're all roughly in some field, sort of. And you basically get a blind man and the elephant book that doesn't have a clear vision about what this field really is. It's something that's very vaguely, there's no consensus about what it really is about, but people wrote chapters about something that was in that area. Now, a better one is what I call consensus, which is probably closer to what Adam Hyde called the book sprint model yesterday, where you have kind of a facilitated collaboration. In this case, you assemble experts from different disciplines. It might be that there's going to be a more focused workshop, maybe by invitation only. Maybe you start by having a plan, a shared vision. And if you're lucky, you have a nice book. But sometimes because, well, you want to get along and you have some nice resort for a week or two at a castle, you sort of don't, you want to avoid the rough edges, and so you end up with a kind of comic book where you don't have the nuance because you're trying to make it easy to do and get along. And so you have kind of a book that maybe is multidisciplinary, but multidisciplinary in a kind of a very shallow way. So I propose the third model, which I call the evangelism model, which says that one person with a big idea proposes the vision for this new book and then recruits experts to help him flesh out the disciplinary corners and become co-authors in that way. So my vision of the elephant looks more like this, where there's some wise man on the elephant leading in a particular direction. And if you're successful, you end up with a really nice crusade that you all get behind. If you're not, you end up with a kind of a quixotic crusade. But if you're lucky, you build this multidisciplinary book where people are behind the same vision because they're following this sort of leader who has this vision. Now, of course, that's the model I think I followed. So I looked at my case study, the evangelical collaboration with the TDO book. I began with my lecture notes from my course at Berkeley. I've been teaching for 5 years trying to develop this material, so it had a pretty clear focus. I had 1,200 slides from 45 hours of lectures. I recruited a number of people to work with me. Many of them were former students. And I had lead authors from every chapter that I'd sort of laid out, and we did a slide swap. Imagine cutting your 1,200 slides, 6 to a page, and then sort of sorting them and saying, let's get the dependencies right. You'll talk about this, and I'll talk about this, and then we'll have this, and we'll have this very clear conceptual graph of the book that you have the tight coverage that you want in a textbook, as opposed to the redundant coverage that you have in this collection of papers from random people. So that was the goal, was to minimize redundancy that way. And it sort of worked, except we ran into 2 inevitable laws of collaboration, which you may or may not know about. The first one is called Conway's Law, which says that the structure of a system always reflects the structure of the organization that builds it. And so if I recruit 8 co-authors, I'm going to have 9 chapters. And whether that's not the right model of the book or not, I had 8 people that worked with me, so I ended up with 9 chapters in the first draft of the book. Because I had 9 people working on it, so we should have a chapter to lead. And of course, that often happens in collaboration, where you sort of optimize the people parts of it at the expense of the intellectual parts of it. And so when some of the authors didn't work out, I was left with holes where there weren't chapters. But I can fix that by running into the second inevitable law of collaboration, which is Brooks' Law, which is that, well, I have a partial draft of the book after a year, but since some of the people that left Berkeley or no longer wanted to work on it, I had to recruit new people, but new people always take time to bring up to speed, and you have to start over. And so the project ground to a halt. And we had some trouble collaborating because, you know, I wanted to have people comfortable with the technology, so I let them all use Word, which is the sort of the minimal authoring common denominator. But it meant that while it was easy to solicit co-authors that way and reviewers, it's not a good environment for collaborating with 18 co-authors. You have a lot of problems passing Word files around. And so we try to use some kind of not book-specific functionality like Dropbox and Google Docs and Skype. And it was really getting difficult. And then a semi-miracle happened. I ran into the guys from O'Reilly who had this thing called Atlas, which is this wonderful collaborative authoring environment, single-source publishing built around DocBook XML, and I was doing XML in 1980, so I could do it. And it has all these good features and built-in transforms for all the source, thank you, Adam. Adam Whitwer, he's the man right there. All right. I was the first non-O'Reilly book done in Atlas. I was kind of the experiment, how to see if we can figure out what the customization issues are in Atlas. It's a wonderful piece of work. They were very helpful. And so my book was in Atlas, in XML, and it has the big magic buttons you push that says build everything. Now, of course, the decision to use, oh my God, okay. The decision to use Atlas poses its own issues because, of course, it's native XML. And so at that point, I said to my co-authors, thank you very much, because I know you can't do XML. And that meant I could finish the book myself, more or less, with my markup editor. But this is where you see the implication of authoring and evolution on this, right? So because I didn't do a bottom-up or an emergent consensus model, I could tell people they were done and thank you very much, and then finish the book myself. But when you do that, you're saying we're not all created equal here. We don't end up with a Wikipedia, we end up with a top-down model. And so in some sense, a top-down evangelical model implies annotation at the edges, rather than everything goes in Wikipedia. So it's sort of, you see how my model of collaboration implies a model of evolution. Now, we just published, as you heard this morning, from the hypothesis talk, a version of this book which is in a browser, and it has hypothesis annotation capability next to it. And we hope to create a version that takes the 600 notes that are in the print book and the annotations I wrote and factor them in hypothesis, so we wouldn't privilege them so much and maybe encourage additional annotation that way from people using the book. We're using the book now in my class, and in other schools using the book will soon be using it that way. And we got to develop a process for migrating user-contributed notes into the authoritative parts of this book. Also, interesting questions about how to manage that visibility and how to have curation of. I'm trying to recruit curators by document type, so like museum curator, library science curator, computer science curator, and so on. So, what is an ebook really at this point? 1 minute. An ebook really is not a book, but it's a family of books, a family of related books that are kind of around a core where you have this ability to have selective inclusion of content, and that content depends on not just the book, but also the relation of the book to the software that reads it and the process by which it's being maintained. And I think that means I'm done. Thanks very much. All right.
All right, we're going to need a second to change over here, and then we've got one last presentation, and then we're on break. Last break, I think. But I'm not sure I can. We're getting professional help. While he's doing that, I'm Bill McCoy. I'm the executive director of the IDPF, the International Digital Publishing Forum, the organization that develops the EPUB standard, and I'm the president of the Redium Foundation, at least the president pro interim of a new open source foundation. However, I'm not really here to talk about either EPUB or Redium. I guess I can't help myself. I probably will by somewhere before the end. I'm really here to talk, try to take a step back and, with some risk, try to make some kind of higher level observations or really do some higher level rabble raising. So let's rabble away. So how many people here are familiar with this quote? Raise your hand if you know who is this. Oh, you guys, you don't. Well, this is the starting words of a book that was published a couple years ago by a guy you may know, Jaron Lanier, who actually lives here in San Francisco, called You Are Not a Gadget. Now you may recognize it because he proceeds for the rest of the book to lament this fact. His book is pretty much talking about all the bad things that come about as a result of this, like we have heard a few things about today, potential loss of privacy around analytics of what you're doing, potential for spam books, et cetera, et cetera. However, when I read this book pretty recently, I kind of was jazzed. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of cool. And it made me think that in a certain way, the most salient thing that's different about digital content and digital books is the fact that it turns the content into data that can be reused and done. Things can be done with them in different ways downstream of the initial creation, which historically wasn't true. So I actually took kind of a positive message away from this, and because it's not just about making ebooks as artifacts to kind of throw out in the supply chain. It's about remixing. It's about search and discovery, and this is where I would be trotting out Borges' infinite labyrinth of books, but I have a commitment never to reuse any slides, and I've spoken here 3 years in a row. This is the 4th year, so I'm sure I used that slide. But there's an infinity of content, and so if we as humans are going to be able to access the content we need for our entertainment, for our research, for our education, we need somewhere to find it. And you need some computer intelligence to help you sort through that labyrinth of content, as well as, again, for the remixing and for the collaboration. And last but not least, for the accessibility, for making that content accessible to you, because not everyone has the human eyes to look at them, in person. So I actually thought that was kind of good. Now we've heard a little bit about this already, this last couple days, and so you know who it is that said this, Marshall McLuhan. And I think we get confused a little bit though about the combination of content and context. And of course, there are times where those things are very combined, are very inherently combined, but there are times where they're not so combined. As we also heard, everyone who first read Dickens' novels read them a week or a month at a time in a serialized form in magazines. That doesn't mean there are not novels. That doesn't mean that it's a completely different experience to read them if you're reading them a chapter a week from a bound book by your bedside table. I think we can say that a story is a story, and while some aspects of it change, the content, you might say, the underlying, the platonic ideal of the story actually doesn't change. And again, I don't think we would suggest that a blind person can't read a book, but they can't physically read a book. But they can certainly read stories. And after all, this was written by him 40 years ago. So it was a long time before there wasn't anything but very gross, kind of coarse-grained ideas of media. I mean, he was talking about movies versus books in this, not talking about print books versus digital books or paperbacks versus hardbacks. And since he's now no longer alive, he passed away in 1980, I can say without fear of him walking on the stage like that scene from Woody Allen to say I know nothing of his work, that he wouldn't have said that the medium of a paperback book and the medium of a hardback book give it two completely different messages. And in fact, he clearly understood that content and context were separate. In his book, he talks about how a light bulb has medium but no content. It's his canonical example of medium without content. So he understood the concept that content could be, and often was, separable in some respects from medium. So does that mean that bookish content is just big data then? Little fragments, things to just be mixed in and sliced up? And I don't think so. And luckily Bob Glushko talked before me, because obviously I can't say anything to you about structure and order and metadata and all that kind of stuff. I mean, because you should just go get his book. But a book is a complex arrangement of content that has linear order and other higher order aspects as well. And so no, in fact, the salient thing about a book is it isn't big data. It isn't reducible to little granular rows and columns in a database any more than our DNA is reducible to base pairs all by themselves. What makes us individuals is how they relate to each other, the order, and what that order generates. And that's true of books too. So in fact, what makes books hard, and the harder that makes them increasingly harder the farther they get from just plain text, like a novel, is that the structure gets more complicated, and so you have this chunky information. You have maybe big squared data. Now, if anyone wants to start a big square data company and offer me some founder stock, that you're welcome, because I've never heard that term before. But I think of it that it's like there's a collection of books. Books in the aggregate are big data, but the chunks are big, and that's the challenge we have, because the challenge we have is to create some way to transport the big part, the chunky part of that data, and have that be meaningful as it gets communicated. Because the risk we take if all we communicate is, say, a PDF or a bitmap image, is we're giving Turing test to anything we want to help us process that data. We're giving a CAPTCHA or pages and pages of CAPTCHAs to computer assistants who are supposed to help us. Now, the computers are getting better and better at that, and so there may come a time when, just as we saw demos of automatically captioning video with audio, that the processing of this kind of chunky data can be better, but it's still not going to be, it's going to be a while if my Google voicemail in my inbox is anything to judge by. And not all pages are reducible. I promised to try to embarrass Adam Whitwer here, so I'm going to do my best. This is an O'Reilly book page. Now, this was not done in DocBook XML, and will be some time before it can be done in a system like Atlas. And I made it kind of small, mainly so you guys wouldn't get to see all the details. Not only is it a complex, crazy infographic of a 2-page up book spread, this is from a headfirst Java, but in the middle of it are 2 other pages. So it's like recursively referencing other also complicated pages. I haven't been able to look to see if those pages also in turn reference still further. I don't think so, but it could be even further recursive. But you can see that taking the structure out of this is no easy task. This is not just a case of supplemental content. It's a case where the organization of the content is inherently very, very complex. So it's just something we need to deal with. And accessibility requires that we make the content machine processable. There's no other way to make content that can adapt to different people's needs, not just the needs of people who are blind or deaf or otherwise have disabilities, but you and me may have different preferences on a phone like this versus on a big screen, or when we get off a flight, or when we get a little older, as some of us have. We need our content in different ways. And so that is one of the key things that makes thinking about content somewhat separably from context interesting and necessary. As well, to really make this fly, the content has to be transportable. It needs to be interoperable. You can have an accessible iOS app. I mean, there are accessibility hooks in the platform, and it's possible to make an accessible iOS app. But that iOS app is still a little silo. It can't be an emissary of your content to go somewhere else. So you need 2 things, accessibility and interoperability. And forget about standards, forget about open source. If you can find a way to make your content accessible and interoperable, I think your work is done. I think those are the 2 key things. But what does this interoperability thing really mean, though? Well, I'll quote some guys from Harvard, John Palfrey and Urs Gassers, who are experts in the field of interoperability. I didn't even know it was a field. Higher levels of interoperability tend to increase competition and foster innovation. So that's a good thing. That's in a book that they wrote that I highly recommend to you, which dives into some topics I won't have time to talk about today, like even DRM. But it's interesting to think, all right, interop's a good thing. But there's something that gets in the way of that, and it's what I call the platform game. This software landscape that we work in IT is a mosaic of ecosystems, aka platforms, specialized for different purposes. And IT firms of all sizes often seek to establish and control platforms. Platforms have this nice property, nice if you're their provider, of lock-in. There are switching costs, which means once somebody's in there, it's costly for them to get out. There's network effects. The more people that come in, the more valuable it is, and the more people who want to come in. And there's often barriers to entry by competitors. Those 3 corners of this triangular fortress of a platform make it a very valuable thing for anyone who can secure it. So just to give you a random example of someone who sells some platforms, this is Mr. Bezos, and their company has at least a handful of different important platforms. Their first platform, chronologically, was e-commerce, not just selling stuff on the internet, but making their e-commerce infrastructure available for others to sell. Then cloud computing was generalized out of that. Amazon Web Services was the next thing they did. And they're the leader in both of these fields. Video on demand was actually the next thing they launched. They launched that and music on demand before they launched the Kindle. And of course, they launched ebooks in 2007, and they've now generalized what was originally a dedicated device business into a more generic mobile device platform, complete with its own app store. So there's 5 different major platforms that Jeff has at his disposal, and one thing he gets to do, therefore, like any good platform vendor with multiple platforms, is to exploit the ones that are entrenched to advance the others. That's called tying. Now, it sounds like it should be illegal, but well, it sometimes is. And in fact, Microsoft Windows has the famous example of that, Microsoft leveraged Windows to promote Office and Internet Explorer to ultimately the violation of fair dealing. Apple iTunes and iPod leveraged both originally OS X. It was available for iTunes was available on OS X for 2 years before they ported it to Windows. Do you think anybody running a business selling music back then would have said, when Windows had 97% market share of desktops, would have said, oh, let's make a music store and let's not make it work on Windows? No, the only rational way to do that, reason to do that, was to promote their platform. And more recently, of course, it's tied to iOS and has barriers to others there. Amazon Video and eBooks are tied to their Amazon Prime e-commerce. They give away books and music, premium content, to customers of Amazon Prime to incent them to stay customers. And again, it wouldn't be a rational thing to do if you were just in the business of maximizing your revenue on video and ebooks, but it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do with the idea that you want to get lock-in to a commerce platform, which they are. And they're also using that platform to promote tablets. You can get Amazon Instant Video, if you're a Prime member, on an Amazon tablet, but not a Google Android tablet. Now, platforms can be open or closed. It happens that all the ones I just spoke about, coincidentally, are relatively closed. Actually, you could say that AWS is pseudo-open. We'll get to that in a minute. Open platforms are interoperable. PC hardware, fax, the web. Closed platforms limit interoperability. Mac hardware, iTunes, iPod, iOS. There's this semi-open state. PC operating systems. Anybody can make a PC, but Microsoft was the only one who could sell the operating system, although there were quote-unquote clones. There were similarly clones of PostScript and PDF from my former employer, Adobe. But they were really developed and controlled solely by that vendor. Amazon AWS is in that category. And by the way, when somebody has a web-based platform, and it's interesting that all 5 of Amazon's platforms build on the web in one way or another, a lot of startups will tell you, oh, we're open, we have an API. Well, that doesn't really make you open. That at least makes you maybe semi-open, but having an API that you control, that you define, that other people have to hew to, and that you can turn on and off at will, as we've seen with Twitter and Facebook and others, doesn't make you open. So open standards are a key thing that facilitates the platform being interoperable, a real open platform. They lower the barriers to entry. They lower the switching costs between providers of platform components. And Clayton Christensen, who's another Harvard guy in the Innovative Solution, talks about the fact that integrated proprietary architectures generally lose in the long run to modular architectures because they cannot generate the diversity of the competition that open modular architecture provides. Now, he was recently criticized widely for being totally wrong with iOS as a counterexample because Apple dominates with iPhone and iPad, but now with Android having the global market share leadership in both phones and tablets, he's not looking so wrong now because it's a more open and modular architecture, even if it's not 100% open. And the network effects in an open platform, an interoperable platform, accrue to the benefit of all adopters. That's the key thing. An open architecture, an open platform, a generative architecture, as Jonathan Zittrain would say, is something that creates benefit to all. An open platform is like a rainforest. Many people can carve out a niche. Many species can carve out a niche in that rainforest. Well, what is an open standard, though? We talked about platforms, but standards, it's debatable like all these terms, but to me it's a specification that's publicly available. It's freely implementable. Again, not always. There can be patent encumbrances. It typically leads to open source implementations. I spelled that wrong, but not necessarily. And often, but not always, collaboratively developed via transparent process. If it's not collaboratively developed, it might be a open standard monk, a pseudo-open standard that's really a vendor's proprietary endeavor, which, again, things like PDF started out as. Well, how do open standards get established? Well, they partly get established through specs, partly through available implementations, partly, and I think mainly, through market forces that reward adopters and punish non-adopters and deviators. Now we're kind of delving into my own theory here. I mean, I have no evidence to back this up, but as I see it, from my historical examples, and being an old guy, I'm going to start with some really long ago examples. PC hardware didn't have any spec. Just some people decided to clone the IBM PC. And it didn't really have any implementation sharing to start with. A few guys started selling something called BIOS, the firmware, but it really was reverse engineered and really not commonly implemented. But the market forces strongly rewarded compatibility. There used to be a class of device called like 90% PC compatible. Now it seems ridiculous. Who would buy that? But the 100% PC compatibles killed them so fast that just faded away. Fax is another example. It's an open standard, but as someone who once upon a time had to implement a combination fax PostScript printer, not Adobe's greatest endeavor ever. It was incompletely specified. The standard was insufficient to know how you had to implement it to make it work. And there was no implementation sharing. You really had to kind of build on top of very low-level modem stuff to make fax work. But the good news was, so to speak, that if you didn't make your device completely compatible with whatever random fax machines were out there, nobody would buy your product. And so everyone building a fax machine, through no standards body, through no open source activity, but just through sheer market pressure, had to have a room full of fax machines that they tested against everybody else's fax machines. And so there was a pretty high standard of compatibility strictly from market forces. And because everyone had random fax machines, deviation wasn't rewarded either. It was hard. There was a little bit, but it was hard to deviate in the fax world. So we had a pretty strong standard here with very limited open standard specification level and limited open sharing. Well, let's take the web as an example, and this is my last example today. The web almost died. For those of you who were doing web stuff back in the dark ages of 2004, Microsoft's IE5 and IE6 had collectively 95% of the market share. Wow. And the standard thing back then was to make an IE-only site, and you might bother to make another site, or you, in many cases, wouldn't. And there's still some vestiges of that lurking around today in the odd nooks and crannies of things like probably healthcare.gov and who knows what else. But that was the world. And so we really could have all given up and just said, okay, Microsoft did an embrace and extend move on the web. They won. It's over. It's their standard now, and let's go home. Or let's all use Flash, which was the other alternative starting to come up at that same time. But if you look at what happened now, it's a healthy, diverse market where 4 different browsers have sizable market share, and therefore it's much less appealing to code for just one of them, which means it really is much more of an open platform. So what could possibly have happened in the last 9 or 10 years that changed it from this, monoculture to an open ecosystem? Well, nobody really knows for sure, but I have some theories that HTML5, of course, was part of it. We've gotten to this good state of implementation of a new standard. But that begs the question of why did people implement the standard? It wasn't just that, well, we developed a spec and so everyone implemented it and now it's fine. I think that's actually getting it exactly backwards. The spec doesn't matter, and I hate to say that as someone who peddles specs. But what matters and what led to this nice green diagram, which unfortunately stands in contrast to the current diagram of EPUB 3 support that Peter Haas from Overdrive showed yesterday from the BISG grid. What led to this over the last 9 years, admittedly there's been a little more time to fill in the green in the HTML5 case, what led to it was a few things. Legal remedies could be claimed to do it, but I don't think that's the case. Other vendors were incented to collaborate to fight the market leader. The market leader had other platform battles to fight. And the community, not just the browser vendors, refused to let the web die and engaged to make HTML5 happen. And that's really my message to you guys today. The community didn't sit back and let the browser vendors even hash it out. People like Mark Pilgrim, Sam Ruby, and many, many others, perhaps some of you in this room, stepped up and said, we need an open web and we're going to make it happen. Well, are we going to do that for books or not? I think that in the web, we need a next generation of portable documents. We need not just books in browsers. We need connected publications for the open web platform. Online-only access to browser apps isn't enough. Websites aren't designed for indirect distribution channels. Publications need to be reliably archivable. We need to get accessibility, and that's hard to do through arbitrary websites at this whole publication level. You saw what Gerardo showed there. We need to decouple content creation and content delivery workflows. If you want to make the programmer your co-author on every project, I hope to hell you have a deep pockets. It just doesn't scale, though. Some content, it makes sense to have the programmer as your co-author. In most cases, I think it makes more sense for you to take someone like Airbook and let their smart programmers be your tool and service developers. And books need to be machine processable in their full big squared data glory. And last but not least, the platform for connected books needs to be open and interoperable, not vendor controlled. If we don't step up, and if Kindle books are ebooks, then I think we're going to regret it down the road. What we're going to get, and I am about to finish, I'm going to skip past these couple slides here that I don't have time to talk about. If we get a monoculture, we're going to end up with a sterile desert. Instead, let's make that ecosystem where we can all thrive. Thank you. You can start queuing up your questions for all three of us. I think we're all three of the last speakers are going to stay up here in the jungle.
Questions?
Are we going to be able to hear?
Don't be shy.
Question in the front. Right. Well, I'm gonna answer that quickly, but I'll repeat the question, which is IDPF moves faster and looser than the W3C at speccing things. We don't have enough testing, and are the major players going to really step up and support this HTML5 based, this robust standard? The first thing, I'll answer the last question first because I think that's easy. We're in the middle of moving from the e-ink era to the tablet and phone era. The salient reason that it's taken a year and a half or 2 years for EPUB 3 to start getting major traction outside of places like Japan where they needed the vertical writing is that e-ink held the market back. But you know what? This is the future. More than half of the readers in the US are reading on this kind of device now. This is the kind of device that textbooks like Bob's are going to be, you know, singing and dancing on, literally and figuratively. So I think that that's going to pull the market along. The most interesting thing that happened in books and browsers this week was Apple shipping Mavericks with iBooks built in. It's an app, but in that app is a web stack, a browser stack, WebKit, and the content flowing in there is EPUB 3. I was so excited to hear today from a major publisher, Harvard Business Press, who's here, that Apple fixed a bug for them, an obscure bug in the spec for EPUB 3 metadata for the author when the device was in landscape orientation only. They fixed it. So that doesn't mean Apple isn't going to try their own embrace and extend things once in a while when they can get away with it. I think you've seen that on the browser side too. But I'm encouraged that the market's moving fast. We have robust support from Kobo, from VitalSource, from CoreSmart. All those vendors are getting together next week at EduPub in Boston, and so I'm optimistic because I do see that the world needs to move on. As far as the first part of your question, there is of course a debate about getting standards right versus getting them fast. At the moment, I hear more pressure to move faster than to move slower and more methodically. We are about to launch an EPUB 3 conformance test suite partnered with BISG. That grid that pained me so much that Paul showed this morning is being phased out in favor of something much more like Can I Use that'll be fine-grained and build on actual test results, and I hope we'll start shaming vendors into all green. So that'll be launched very soon, and again, BISG is taking the lead on helping to do it, but it's an IDPF activity. So it's not perfect, and of course, as you know, W3C and IDPF are working to collaborate as part of, among other things, the W3C digital publishing activity, and W3C is a co-sponsor of this EduPub. So we got a lot of work to do to get this big vision of portable documents built on the open web as part of the open web to really make it happen. But I mean, we're going to get there. I mean, I'm sorry, Jeff. We just can't let you control digital books.
I thought I was intense.
I didn't do the right voice. I'm sorry, Jeff. We can't let you do that.
Okay. Okay. So the question is essentially, can you imagine a tool set that would help you build books like the one I built, this multidisciplinary book where one book is really the core of a set of possible books with supplemental content? Yeah, the answer is I think that we can build that. I think essentially I can imagine a kind of authoring environment that essentially says, as you write content, you're essentially marking it up in some conceptual way, saying this is core, this is supplemental, this is what the dependencies are, this example depends on this explanation, so you should put them in that order kind of thing. And then when you push a button saying build a book with this kind of configuration, you only build books that kind of make sense. So I've done a lot of work on the supplemental end, where you add content to a core book. I'm also thinking about the subtractive end, where everybody who writes a book could also write the Malcolm Gladwell book, where you throw out everything except for the cute examples, just by saying, this is only the fun stuff for the airport bookstore book that's not very deep, right? So core book, you subtract this stuff. Core book, you add this stuff. You have a family of books in one authoring environment. I think that's possible, because I think it's just a question of what the right model is of describing the content, but it's disciplinarity, prerequisites, reading level. There's a class of things which probably would let you build that model that would be reasonably workable. It's probably, next year's project when I get some more students to get behind it,
Can I add something?
Yeah. We should work together on this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add, basically. Working with teachers in South Africa with this editor, they really want to have books that are like the teacher's book, the teacher's guide part, and the student's book, and the supplemental workbook. And they want to edit all those three things together. And so there's this model of linking, copying, moving of content that I think we can support if we, I think there'd be some really interesting experiments there.
Sure.
And there's a new publishing revenue opportunity to sell the cheat code version, to the students for upsell. Question from Mr. Peter Bayless back there. Could you speak up? Maybe you could stand up and project. Right. Well, first of all, they're lying to you. To paraphrase the question, is it interoperable? Does interoperability mean you can make it run on different pieces of hardware? No.
Confused. They're not lying.
Okay. Well, they're confusing you because there are many closed platforms out there that run on lots of devices. Let me back off that. It is a form of interoperability. A very weak form. Just like, for example, saying my thing runs in a web browser, therefore it's interoperable, is also a weak form of interoperability if it runs there in a way that the content can never be pulled out and moved out and the consumer has no control. So closed platforms exist on the web and they exist across platforms. I think the way this works is that the things we need to do with the content of books are manifold. And you cannot afford to author your books for all these different proprietary platforms, but you're going to have to man up and cowboy up, cowgirl up, cow person up, and insist that vendors accept your content and provide it to consumers in an interoperable form and an accessible form. And if you don't, then this won't work. But there's a weapon, which is EPUB.js and friends. Which is sorry, I'll get to this in a second. yeah, there's now 4 different open source libraries for browser-based EPUB reading. And we've seen one today already, EPUB.js, but there's 3 other ones. These are all open source. They let you take an EPUB file and serve it from your browser to anybody. You can, as a publisher or a content developer, do that. And there's an open source SDK for native app development. Micah Bowers is here somewhere from Bluefire, and he has an iOS app. Again, it's an app, but under the covers, it's a browser engine that has Readiem SDK and has high quality, truly interoperable EPUB 3 support. So there are going to be options for content distributors, and the bar is going to be raised. The competitive bar is being raised by Kobo, by iBooks, by VitalSource and CourseMart, by the open source activities of Readiem Foundation. We just need to keep pushing and not accept least common denominator as an answer. But if you accept least common denominator as an answer, then that's what we'll get. Right. There's a chicken and egg problem. I will say, though, the classic way past the chicken and egg has been that browser makers put stuff in before front-running content development. Obviously, you can't do it in content until the browser has it. So if we can't get, we've got to front-run it. And I think Mozilla helped save HTML5, helped save the web. And I hope that Readiem and EPUB.js and other activities like that will help save portable documents for the web.
We need to get Consumers Reports to put little seals on books, or UL saying this is the EPUB 3 safe book. Otherwise, it'll likely to blow up or something. Or get some kind of scare campaign going that non-standard books will hurt you or something.
I was thinking about government mandates, but I like your idea better. Correct. And to be fair, Peter, certification. I mean, EPUB is a trademark like, say, USB, and it's possible that we can do more like USB to say you can't use this logo unless the thing actually works. And again, fax didn't have that, and it still worked. But I think there are some opportunities we have to use branding and consumer awareness that we've frankly been. That standards group, the IDPF, they've been doing a really piss poor job at that. So I'm hoping they'll do better.
EPUB 3 inside.
Actually, I think
Intel would probably get you on that.
I think HTML5 inside's better personally, because I think that's the more. I think actually the HTML5 is more important than the EPUB part. But
All right, thank you. That was great. And so I know that I've let the schedule slip a little bit. So what we're going to do is keep the break length as is. So let's convene about 3:10. And so if it's okay, we'll leak or borrow from the in discussion just a little bit. But I thought that was a valuable discussion for us to have. So thank you, guys. 20-minute break. Thanks.
for their code till the land was forsaken. Wrote it all down as the progress of man. When I die, let my ashes float down the Green River, and my soul roll on up to the Rochester Dam. I'll be halfway to heaven, with paradise awaiting, just 5 miles away from wherever I am. Thank you. That was a John Prine song. We are honored to have Sylvie sing one for us here.
I keep my, I've got a big, like, 64 here.
Right? Get rid of that.
I'm doing a whole backpack, because then I can't possibly live without it, right? But that's just way too easy to lose.
Thank you.